Hello everyone, and this is our final video for this chapter for control through the purchase process. And this we're going to talk about how do we decide whether we're going to make something or we're going to buy something, right? So are we going to use a convenience product or are we going to make something from scratch? And it comes down to a few things. What's the cost of ingredients? How much labor goes into it? How much energy cost, right? So we have to determine what's the financial implication, for whether we're going to make something or we're going to buy a convenience product. So what we do is we figure out a cost proportion. And really it's by adding our recipe cost, our labor cost, and our energy costs, and then dividing by the number of portions. Now, if you remember, I talked about direct labor cost before. Direct labor cost is the amount of time that you spend working on something, not waiting for something to cook or something to rise, right? If you put a lasagna in the oven, you're not going to wait the hour for it to bake. You're going to be working on something else. So if I'm the chef, I'm not paying you to stand in front of the oven and watch the lasagna cook. I'm paying you for the time to cook the noodles, grate the cheese, make the bolognese sauce, right? All those things, right? Energy cost we're going to use here is an estimate. You can figure that out based on calculations that you can get off of direct energy websites, EPCOR websites, based on your oven and the energy consumption of your ovens. So the first example I've got here is a lasagna recipe yields 48 portions and costs $41.58 in ingredients. An employee earns $12 per hour, spends 2 hours making the lasagna, and the recipe's energy costs are estimated at $3.50. What is the recipe's cost per portion for the make-buy analysis? So I like to do a little chart, and I've actually on my whiteboard here, I've got the next example, which is buying a product, right? Buying a frozen product. So we're going to do both of these examples at the same time because I like to make a chart, right? So we're going to make and we're going to buy, right? So the first thing we've got here, we've got our food cost, labor cost, and energy cost. Okay, so the first one here is make. So let's make this one green. Let's do make. So our lasagna recipe yields 48 portions. Let's make this 48. And costs $41.58 in ingredients. $41.58. An employee earns $12 per hour and spends 2 hours making the lasagna. So $12 per hour times 2 hours. And we have an energy cost of $3.50. So we can figure out what's the cost per portion to make this. So our labor cost, 12 times 2 is $24, right? So $41.58 plus our $24 plus our $3.50 is going to give me what? Let me add it up. Plus 24 plus 3.5 gives us $69.08. Oops, 8 cents. Now it yielded 48 portions, so we're going to divide that by 48. And we're going to get up with a portion cost of $1.44. Okay. For the buy, the restaurant in the example can buy frozen lasagna serving 30 portions. So our buy is 30. And it requires, oh, sorry, I missed the price. So $28 is our food cost. And our labor cost requires $2 in energy. And it only takes 15 minutes. So $12 times 0.25 of an hour, right? Oh, I'm missing my 12, right? So our 12 times 0.25 is going to give us $3. So 28 plus 3 plus 2 says $33 total. But this only made 30 portions, so divide by 30, and we end up with a portion cost of $1.10. So to buy this lasagna, it's cheaper than it is to make it. It's not always so. I mean, a lot of the time we assume that it is cheaper to make something than to buy something. And that's not always true, right? Depending on the factory and the bulk buying costs, they can bring down their food costs significantly, right? But do we make our decision based on these numbers here? No. We're going to use those numbers as part of our decision-making process. The math isn't the end-all be-all. We need to look at this lasagna and say, well, what's the quality? Is the quality similar? Or is it significantly less for the purchased one? And I know you're going to say, well, making the lasagna is always better, making from scratch. Trust me, I've seen some students make some lasagna. I'd rather eat the bought one, right? So you have to take into consideration what your quality is. An honest answer, not just saying making it yourself from scratch is always better than purchased ones, because I've had some pretty good purchased lasagnas in my time, right? Generally, they're more expensive, but my point I'm making is you can't just look at the price to determine the answer, right? If the customer senses a decline in quality, obviously business will decrease, right? Do we have the space and equipment to make the product from scratch? In the case of our lasagna, right, do we have enough oven space? Do we have, an automatic cheese grater to make our life easier, right? Do we have the labor available to make the lasagna from scratch, right? I'll give you an example. Back when I was director of culinary at MacEwan University, we used to do convocation and cater that, and it was coffee and cookies. So we had to make a boatload of cookies. I'm talking like 10,000 cookies over the week of convocation. I didn't have big enough mixers to make cookie batter for thousands of cookies, right? So I would bring in the pre-made cookie dough frozen, portion them up, and we'd be baking them all day long for a week, right? But I didn't have the equipment or the manpower to do that many cookies for 1 week out of the year. Sure, I could have hired some more staff to come in and make those cookies from scratch, but what would I do with those employees for the other 50 weeks of the year, right? So there is a point where it may be more expensive to buy the cookie dough in this example versus making it yourself, but it's just not physically possible to make that volume in your small space, right? Do you need to invest in a huge mixer or some capital expense in order to do this? If it's over a long period and it's going to change the face of your business, well, that's something to consider, right? The point is, just because the assumption is that making things is cheaper does not mean that we should make everything from scratch. We just can't do it. We don't have time. We don't have the manpower sometimes, right? You're not making your bread for your clubhouse sandwiches from scratch, probably, right? Maybe you're making the bread that you serve on your table, for your dinner from scratch, but there's some give and take always, right? And what's feasible and what's not. Are you making mayonnaise from scratch or are you buying it, right? Most often people are buying it. So, all right, this concludes the chapter on control through the purchasing process. We'll be moving on to the next chapter when we're talking more about inventory, requisitions, issuing, that whole receiving process.